In this episode, I spoke with John Barnes, one of the earliest recruiters to specialise in quantum. We went deep into how early quantum teams are actually built, the hiring mistakes that quietly stall startups, how global talent really moves across the UK, Europe, and the US, and why ethics in recruitment isn't optional in a small, highly connected ecosystem. John's been working in this space since 2014, so this comes from real experience, not theory or hype. If you're building in quantum, hiring for it, or mapping out your own career in this industry, there's a lot in it for you. Quantum technology is moving fast, but building real impact takes more than breakthroughs. It takes the right people, the right strategy, and the right ecosystem. Welcome to Beyond the Bit Quantum Pathways. I'm Amir Rasool. Each episode I speak with founders, researchers, and operators, shaping how quantum is built, commercialized, and scaled in the real world. And if you're building teams in quantum, QAI Talent tackles this exact challenge.
Hi, John. Great to see you again, and welcome to Beyond the Bit Quantum Pathways.
Hi, Amir. Good to see you, mate. Nice to have a chat today.
Fantastic, exactly. So I'll kind of get straight into it. So first thing, Entangled Positions, great name. Where did it come from?
Well, Entangled Superpositions was just too long and something had to get cut out of it. But I was thinking about quite a few names because when I created Entangled Positions, it was effectively an evolution of my previous company, Profector Associates, and I wanted to be overtly quantum. So Dead Cat Recruitment, yeah, probably not the impression I was going for. You know, there was a lot of other names that maybe weren't necessarily the sort of impression you want to give. And Entangled and Superpositions kind of both seemed to have a feel for what we were doing, and something had to go, and it was Super that went. So that Entangled Positions as a name was born from that.
I love it. When I saw it, when obviously we met about a year and a half ago or something like that, I kind of remember. And I saw Entangled Positions and I was like, damn, that's a good name. I like it. So interestingly, you obviously pivoted into quantum. Was that kind of a plan that you had, or did you evolve that as the market emerged? And when, for those who don't know?
Well, probably the opposite of that, really. So it wasn't a plan and there wasn't a market. So I definitely didn't do it from the sort of the normal recruiter playbooks. So I'd been back in 2014, I'd been a tech recruiter for about 10 years, predominantly around sort of software, evolving, with sort of data, telco, banking, touched on things like data, machine learning in the early days and things like that. And one day, someone I'd worked with as a senior candidate phoned me up and said, John, I like the way you work. Didn't really like any of the other recruiters. I'm building a photonic quantum computer and all the subsystems. Can you find the team? And I said yes.
Is this the fake it till you make it type scenario?
Well, not really, because I didn't quite realize what I was getting into. I thought, well, of course, I'm a recruiter. I do tech. This is what I do. I can do that. I can learn the things. It's fine. And then I started looking a bit deeper into it and it realized quite what I'd got myself into. But luckily there was, 2014, there was no money in the market. There was no market. Nobody was watching. So I got to make all of my mistakes in private conversations. No need to fake it because everyone wanted to tell me what they'd been up to. I just had to piece things together. It was also at the time when basically the only things you could find on quantum at the time were either dishwasher tablets that had nothing to do with quantum, or the Feynman lectures, and there was nothing in between. Maybe a year or so later, Jim Al-Khalili and people like that started doing stuff that was more publicly available. And I kind of looked at the double slit experiment, and this was a bit of a problem because my brain was trying to work out why and how it happens. And so for about 2 weeks, I had a really sore head. I'm sure it had grown and stretched, and there was, the sort of joints in my head were cracking and things like that. And after about 2 weeks, I had an epiphany where I suddenly realized that this wasn't my job. There are much cleverer people than me that show this is demonstrably and repeatably true and make stuff work with it. My job wasn't to do this. I didn't have to worry about it. And my head instantly kind of reverted back where it was. And it's a nice humbling experience, which I think everyone needs to go through in quantum.
For sure. Well, interesting. 2014, that's super early because that was when the pivot was happening to what is AI or precursor to AI, which was data science and machine learning. And I kind of pivoted into that in 2016. Just 2 years after you were pivoting towards quantum and hardware. So did that convince you that this area needed specialist recruiters?
No, I don't think it needed, at the time, because it didn't really need recruiters as such. So I kind of had to almost go a little bit earlier. So the relationship I mentioned, this was sort of pre-funding. So my relationship was, as and when they received funding, I would get paid. So I was placing people in that were working until they got their funding, and actually it never came through. So I never actually got paid for any of this, but it was a good learning curve. Everyone was open and honest and transparent. So there was no bad feelings. It was one of those things. But it was a really good learning curve, and I got to make all my mistakes. I wasn't restricting anyone else. Nobody was watching, and it was a quite a good pathway. And at the time I was working with, I had a few other things that I was working on. An associate agent of mine was giving me roles to work on with, robotics and AI, and my sort of software background, solutions architects and things like that. So I could keep busy with that. But I then kind of went a bit further up along the chain. So I was working with the laser manufacturers that were building the products that the quantum computing companies would need before the quantum computing companies needed it, or cryogenics and semiconductors and all of the sort of machine learning and all of the sort of constituent pieces. So I got the big picture learning when quantum was still very small and you could specialize in all of it to a degree. I got that. So as things have grown, I can still keep a touch on all of the different pieces of quantum, and not just compute, but sensing and comms and everything else. So it's harder and harder to be that deep dive specialist in all of it, but I've still got a finger on the pulse of each of it. I can quickly turn my hand to pretty much all the different pieces of quantum, from going back to when it was embryonic and seeing how it built up. So I don't think there was dedicated recruiters needed at the time necessarily.
Yeah, true.
But it was something that would become needed, and I think it also meant that I got involved with a lot of things recruiters aren't and probably should never be involved with, but from for the reasons of trying to create something for good. And so that actually meant that I was able to, for example, to help sort of guide and shape the ecosystem a little bit, and I was able to tell tens of thousands of people all of the bad, unethical tricks that recruiters do before there were any recruiters. So I've kind of, as much as possible, I've tried to create a platform for ethical recruitment in quantum, and not so that all of the bad tricks will be seen when they come into play, all the exploitative techniques. So it's never going to be a perfect defense, but I've tried my bit to at least try and create an ethical bar for people to step over.
That was fantastic. That's one of the things that I've seen in you, and I do admire you for. What was the hardest about year one, I suppose? Was clients, candidates, understanding or even explaining what you did?
Yeah, so with in quantum or with entangled positions, because they've both got quite challenging. So the first
tell
one,
me both.
Well, the first one, it was really, there was just learning quantum, and the fact I had to sort of find a way for that time and also in future, which for a lot of the time involved sitting between a beach and a jungle somewhere with a lower cost of living, which was quite nice. But yeah, really just sort of learning the ecosystem and working out what it was all about, really, without having any of the resources and materials. So then you had to learn the technique of learning, not just do the learning, you had to learn how to learn these things, because it weren't there. So there was kind of skills developed. When it comes to, and I think as well, there was something you told me. You were speaking to someone we both know and actually in both respect, actually, and they said when you sort of first got involved, saying, to start off with work, you've got to work out what you can do for quantum, not what quantum can do for you, or words to that effect.
Yeah, 100%.
And I kind of went through that journey my own way, and I kind of, within about a year or two, I'd basically broken down all of the things I'd learned in recruitment and unlearned a lot of things. And I took a long, hard look in the mirror, because so much of what recruiters get trained is unethical, but you get trained it from day one and you don't realize it is, because it's so normal. Like when you're speaking to candidates about, asking where they're interviewing and taking leads and trying to put other candidates in, using the information they've given you to exploit them, trying to replace them with other candidates. It's so normal, you don't realize it. And I sort of broke all of these things down and rebuilt it. So I'm pretty sure, because I've worked for myself and I've not really interacted in anyone else's agency, I know for a fact that nobody else recruits quite like me, because I kind of broke it down and invented it. There'll be a lot of people who do similar things, don't get me wrong, but the exact process won't be the same, because it's kind of something I created from within quantum as well. So that was an evolution, I think, with quantum. With entangled positions, it was a little bit different, really. I'd kind of gone from working for myself, and then I created entangled positions. So I was, first few months, I'm doing the branding and the accounts and everything, all the stuff I'm not good at. that takes me 10 times as long as it does for someone who is good, then kind of year one, like, so within a few months, I went from, I think it was July of one year to July of the next, and had like 1,000% headcount growth. So I was earning the money, hiring the team, training the team, doing the accounts, doing the branding, doing everything basically. And I thought, well, if that's not hard enough, what I'm going to do as well is I don't want to hire recruiters and import bad ethics and ruin the culture before I get started. I'll hire people who aren't recruiters, but I think have got the right attributes for quantum and for recruitment. So I was training people on quantum, training them on recruitment, which is quite tricky on its own, earning all of the money, all of the back office stuff. That in itself was quite a challenge. But weirdly enough, it was the stuff that maybe most people wouldn't find as challenging, like the back office and design and all that, that was probably more challenging. The stuff that most people do quite easily that I found most challenging. But yeah, I took on far too much in one go.
Yeah. I think it's quite an interesting learning curve. So our careers kind of parallel each other a little bit, and I've done now all of that, and the branding, the back office, the payroll, and all of that. But it's learning a new skill. Not mastering it necessarily, but what I learned from doing that is you get to understand the back end of a business a little bit more, and so on. And when you're in the world such as we are, and you're in startups, you can kind of look at challenges that they have and relate a little bit, I suppose. From a recruitment perspective, I know that you recruit in the UK, Europe, and the US. Are there any real differences? Or what are the real differences?
Yeah, do you know what? There's quite a lot actually. So I think for some of it, it's kind of second nature. So you kind of flick into the mode of that region naturally. When you speak with people, you sort of mirror people to a certain extent.
Sure.
Particularly someone who's lived in other countries and other cultures, you sort of naturally mirror people to increase the cohesion of your communication. So I think there's an element of sort of flicking into that type of communication and understanding. But I think a lot of it is, so if you take sort of UK, Europe, US, one of the big things is the visa situation. What's the immigration status? And also knowing what each place has that makes it unique and appealing. So often there's quite a lazy narrative. So, everyone wants to go to the US because of the money. And that's true. I'm not disputing that. But it's when you start breaking it down, it's people's perceptions are different to the reality, because you've got to factor in things like cost of living. You've got to factor in what the benefits look like, work-life balance. And this is not just the regions, but also individual organizations. And I think there's a lot of, there's some quite sophisticated differences, and I think you get to know them and they become second nature. And when you're speaking to people, you want to find out what motivates them, what their aspirations are, and then you can pick out the things that are most important to them. So it might be that, someone, say for example, someone's moving to the US and they can move, but their family is really important. They wouldn't get necessarily automatic visas for their family. Well, that's a much bigger thing than the extra 20% in salary they earn. Whereas coming to the UK, you may get that. It might be that, for someone else, they may want to live in an English-speaking country. So obviously, that may be that. So somewhere like Germany, for example, is probably easier than somewhere like Italy. Then you've got sort of the US and UK where that's going to be easier as well. Someone like Holland, they in Holland or Switzerland, they speak English better than we do in England, so there's not much concern with that. But there's all these little nuances that sort of come into play. A lot of areas in MENA where there's, it's tax-free for expats and all these sorts of things. So there's all sorts of layers, but I think it first of all comes from, in our role, I think it comes from understanding the person you're trying to represent for a role and what's important to them, and then working out the different facets that are most relevant to them.
Interesting. Well, that kind of raises this question, actually. So it's for some reason, it just made me think about Brexit and hiring. Obviously, you mentioned Germany, the Netherlands, not Holland, the Netherlands, and various other places. In your opinion, has Brexit materially changed hiring, or is that overstated?
Yeah, so I think so. Going back to when Brexit was happening, so both before and after, I had a few conversations with people about Brexit, and it was interesting because if you remember at the time, kind of two of the biggest things were the people that were for remaining basically said that those who wanted to leave were racist, and that was one of the big arguments. And the people that wanted to leave was trying to drive that because they wanted to reduce immigration. And
sovereignty.
This isn't being wise after the event, but at the time I was like, well, that's clearly the wrong way round, because if we leave, then clearly there's going to be more immigration. And if we stay, that's actually more racist because you're looking at the people that are of a similar demographic to the nation rather than all of the other people in the world that have a broader demographic. It was a lazy narrative that was spun by those with a vested interest, but these were
Yeah.
the total wrong. The arguments given by those sides would have done the total wrong side of it. And to the reason I mention this is that I had a few conversations with people from Europe that were, sort of concerned about what was happening, or sort of referencing, is there likely to be xenophobia? But then the people that weren't from Europe were kind of, oh, this is great, Britain's not as xenophobic anymore. So it was kind of depending on who you spoke to, you got a different viewpoint on it. Um,
Hmm.
I noticed afterwards, it just became a lot easier working in quantum to get good people to the UK because the restriction, it wasn't you was working with 400 million people, you're working with 8 billion people.
Yeah.
So actually, that from my side, that became a lot easier. I would counter that by saying, on a number of the sort of strategic national boards and things like that I've sat on, I know that in academia they actually found that were issues getting people, sort of academics, their PhDs and postdocs. They had challenges, but in the commercial arena, it was the opposite. It became a lot easier after Brexit.
Hmm.
And but I would actually reference something that's happening at the moment. So where there's a plan this year in the UK to basically, so there's a lot of conversation in the UK about immigration, and what happens is everyone conflates all immigration to one thing that's either all amazing or all terrible, and there's very little nuance in discussions. I think the government strategy has been very much, well, what we'll do is we want to bring down the total number of people immigrants coming to the UK,
Hmm.
whilst the number of illegal migrants is increasing, has been increasing rapidly. Their counterbalance is actually to then reduce the number of legal migrants, and particularly those with high skills, which I don't really see the logic behind it, other than you can give out this lazy narrative. And what I've
Yeah.
actually found is that, so where the areas we work in, their plan is to basically make it twice as long before you can become a UK citizen, giving people more hoops to jump through. And I've spoken to a lot more people concerned about this government policy than I ever did at Brexit at the time. And actually, I agree that this is a far more serious problem to the UK's ability to attract really good people than Brexit was. Brexit was more a change in style, and which
Yeah.
some would benefit from and some may not. And there was obviously wider social context, but in terms of the immigration within quantum, this is a far greater challenge. I'm hearing far more concern than I ever did for Brexit.
Would you say, as a result of that, we're losing UK talent?
I don't think it's got to that stage yet. However, so of course we are losing, but I don't think it's got to a stage whereby it's affecting the flow into the UK drastically yet. But there's a consideration for people, and don't forget, this law hasn't actually been implemented yet, so it's still at the draft stage. So this is kind of people being concerned for what's upcoming. I wouldn't be surprised if there was another U-turn on this, to go with the other 15 or however many there's been.
To be fair, I don't even know where we stand on most things anymore.
I think realistically, if there's any common sense with this, it has to be at least watered down or exceptions made. I think there probably, from what I'm gathering, there probably are workarounds on this, but it shouldn't be about workarounds. It should be not just you're able to do it, you should be seen to be doing it. And I think it's important the message we send out, and particularly with global geopolitics at the moment, this is a really good opportunity for the UK to cement its place in quantum and really stay at the front. This heavily risks what we're doing, and it needs some serious thoughts.
You know what? I couldn't agree with you more. It's a fantastic opportunity to put a flag in the sand. Say, okay, well, this is what we stand for. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and be a beacon. So I think that's fantastic.
And you can
kind of pivots me on to.
So I was going to say, you can expand that out to other areas in science, in engineering, in nursing, and there's a lot of skills that our universities aren't producing in sufficient numbers, and some of it is not being produced sufficiently globally. For others, it's in specific areas that we need to improve on. I think actually this should be something that's being addressed, and encourage domestic people to be more involved with these subjects, and also make it easier for international workers to be able to come to the UK, and not just to work, but to set up and live and become part of the wider sort of social and work community that they're in. I think this is an area that there's too much political footballing being played with this, and not enough actual thought and empathy and understanding of what needs to be done.
Yeah, we could kick this ball down the road for ages. So I'm going to bring it back a little bit because otherwise we're like, because we're sitting here shouting at each other in a minute. And another thing, but okay, bring it back to quantum. So obviously, quantum pathways, bit lighter. What's the hardest quantum role you've ever had to fill? What was it and why?
Hardest. Do you know what? I don't know whether it's the hardest. It's probably the one that the biggest learning curve, I think, probably, right? I don't know about the hardest. It may be both, actually. So going back about 10 years or something like that. So this was before quantum computing companies were really quantum computing for the most part. I was working with laser manufacturers that were building the equipment that quantum computing companies would be using. So, ion traps, atom traps, MOTS and things like that. And I was sort of working with a few roles there, and I had some scientific sales roles. And so these were people that would be working with, the quantum computing companies that were the embryonic quantum computing companies in the laser cooling arena. They'd be working with PIs at university, national labs, and Nobel laureates. So if you're going to consult to a Nobel laureate, you need someone that knows a little bit about lasers, can put a setup together and all these sorts of things. You can't have a salesperson. So it needed PhDs minimum, ideally postdocs, and bright that could communicate. And I spent quite a long time speaking to people. And as soon as I started talking about the role, they'd run a mile. And I sort of took me a while to, there was no sort of playbook to work on this. And I realized actually it was how I was discussing the position. You go to, sell the sizzle, not the sausage. And I was basically scaring people away by how I phrased the role initially, rather than going into the specifics of the role and why they'd be excited. They heard the word sales and run a mile, because now sales people get it where it comes in. Then I want to be doing research. They heard the word sales, switched off, zoned out, and weren't interested. It's very difficult to turn someone around. Then I discussed the role with them, and it didn't matter. At the end, I could have said any job title because they were excited about it. And I was placing people into these roles, and I'd speak to them, months or years later, and they'd say, "John, it's amazing. These are people on their third postdoc and things like that." The level of science I was doing in that role was so much higher than what I was doing in my postdoc or doing at this national lab and that national lab. And it was very much just about that communication skill and understanding the person that you're speaking to and what their drivers are. And not just understanding it, but being able to apply that. So, I don't know. Maybe that's the hardest in some ways.
It's quite interesting point that throughout my career, I've always said to people, I said, look, I kind of ignored the job title in a way, because one VP here could be a senior manager there, but what's the role itself? Let's look at what you're actually going to be doing, what you bring to the table, what you're going to be doing, and where this role will take you. They're the three things that I like to kind of lay out pretty clearly. And then, job titles come and go. I mean, in recruitment, you've had it only trainee, recruitment consultant, team leader, senior, this, that, the other, and the list goes on and on and on. But what are you actually doing, and how can that take you further along the road? I suppose based on that, what makes a good a good quantum job description?
Contact with a hiring manager. So I get a job description. In my process, the job description is good for the candidate. It's not the most important thing to me. For me, I get a job description. I want to speak with the hiring manager and say, okay, great. Thanks for the job description. That's lovely. What do you really want? That's what makes a good job description for me. It's kind of my notes that I've attached to it, because I need to understand it and also be able to demonstrate that. But I think in terms of for people writing job descriptions, I think you're pretty much always going to fall into one or two camps. You're either going to be too vague, and it doesn't really fit anyone, but you don't miss out on people because you're catching everything, or it's too tight and you miss out on good people. And you're pretty much always going to have to go one way or the other, because you're never going to be able to tick every box. And if you do tick every box, people are going to read it and be overawed by it. So I think one of the things I'd recommend is be concise with the job description, because the job description is basically about getting someone to interview. At that stage, you can then you can unpack it a lot more. If you're putting that, so it's not quite as bad as it was. We still see it, but if you're putting, 10 or 15 things down on a job description that are essential, I mean, if that person exists, they probably already got a company that could buy the company you're working for. So, and let's not go down that route. You also then run into the masculine versus sort of feminine job descriptions, where if you've got a long list of essential things, someone with a masculine mindset is more likely to apply for it if they've got 3 or 4 of them. Someone with a feminine mindset is less likely if they've got 8 out of 10 of those things. So I think keep it simple. Don't try and list every single thing you need. Get the big things on there, the most important things. So what do you really need from this person? And then alongside that, think, well, what can I train as well? So if the person's got this, this, and this, I can train all of those things. That's fine. Or they don't need that. There's someone else in the team that can support that. Kind of keep it simple. Keep it something that someone can read and encapsulate. And if they're left wondering a little bit about what the job entails, well, that's good. They're curious. They're going to ask you questions. They want to know more about it. That's much better to leave the crowd wanting more than overwhelm them and rule them out at that stage. So that would be my view on things. And also, if there's something that is, say there's something that you don't necessarily need, but it's a nice to have, explain that on there. Say, don't necessarily need this, but extra bonus points for this thing. Or if you've got a list of essential things, say, make sure you reference that we don't necessarily need all of these things. We understand that good people come in different packages or whatever it might be, but don't assume that people can read your minds. I would say, less is more on job descriptions. Make it exciting and appealing for someone, and you're almost sort of tempting someone to come and find out more, rather than give them everything they could ever know and they're bored by the time they finish reading it.
100%. Yeah, it's got to be something that creates curiosity. Not easy for me to say, rather than a checklist that makes people walk away. Now, it's interesting. I read an article on the masculine and feminine, whether my opinion's not is obviously irrelevant, but I'd never seen that before, where certain people will apply thinking that, oh yeah, I can do that, or if they haven't got it, and some people will be put off because there's too much there going, oh well, I don't necessarily have that, so then all of a sudden they'll just shut the door. So less is definitely more, and curiosity is definitely key.
And I just on that side of things as well. So generally with these articles, they talk about men and women. I actually think it's more masculine and feminine mindsets, because I think it does lean more towards the sex. But actually, I think it's a mindset thing where actually people will. It's not binary like that. People, it's not, you're a woman, you think that way. You're a man, you think that way.
Yeah.
There's sort of an overlap with this. And actually, one of the biggest things that in our role. So since Entangled Positions starts, and we place 2 women to every man and this goes back to when we started. And a lot of that, I think because we treat people as individuals, and there's an appetite in the industry to have balanced teams, and that means hiring more women. We just reflect the desires of hiring managers, but actually a big part of our role is just removing the barriers. So if we've got someone who's less confident, our role is to sort of build that confidence up, remove the barriers, and not in terms of misplaced faith in people, but in terms of genuine identifying they are right, and give them the confidence, teach them what they need, train them on this, build the confidence on that, explain what's happening, remove any surprises. And it's amazing. I still see, I'm still on conversations where whether it's sort of national sort of government or public sector, super governmental, and all of these things. And the amount of conversations I hear people saying, well, we want to hire this many of this type of person, this many of this type, and it has to be that. And I get quite depressed, not because I don't think it's a good idea, but it's like you want to segregate people on the things you want to counterbalance discrimination by segregating people. There's some cognitive dissonance there, and I sort of say what we're doing in terms of 2/3 of our placements are women. Equally, around 2/3 of our placements are ethnic minority as well. And I mentioned that, and the response is pretty much always, "Oh, that's nice," and then move on the conversation, because they've got this dogma where they're told they need to do this. They've heard it from political or academic circles. This is how you do it, and you put quotas in and you label people this, that, and that will solve the problem. And it's so ingrained and so dogmatic. For the most part, they never ask how we do it or what we do. They go, "That's nice," and move on. And I think this is something that quantum is in a better place than most industries when it comes to this. But there's a lot to still be learned, and I think there's an appetite to learn it for a lot of people. But I think sometimes there's still an education piece that we can progress on this. And I think with the feminized job specs and things like that, that's something that I think a lot of people are aware of relative to other industries. But there's a lot of work I think that we can still do, and I think we need to be echoing the right voices, not the same voices that have just been conditioned to think that way in academia or political circles, because we know that way is limited.
Yeah. And interestingly, I think having worked in sort of startup space for most of my recruitment career, a lot of the people I see in the startups, they're not hirers, they're not recruiters. They don't necessarily know the recruiting angle. They're very bright and they've set up a company, but that skill set is limited to what they're good at. So for us, it's open dialogue with owners, founders, etc. And okay, look, now let's look at recruitment from a different perspective. Problem is, they're all kind of looking at, well, this is what this person's done, so we're just going to copy that, and they'll see a job description on whatever website it is, and go, well, we'll just kind of, copy that, and so on. There's one thing I had a conversation with a startup, and it was like, they were hiring in the FANG model. And I'm like, look, you're not FANG. I know this 996 and blah, 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 whatever. You're not FANG. You don't have the salary, the equity, or whatever it is that they give. So you've got to start looking at a different way of hiring. And it's about creating that job description that matches the company, I think.
And actually, I think with that as well, it's really important to know what marks you out as special. Don't try and be something else.
Exactly.
People think it comes down to salary, and I don't know how many tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands now conversations I've had, and the amount of times when I'm speaking with candidates, I said, the biggest, most important question I can ask, what's most important to you in the next step of your career? And it's very rarely is it money. This is, don't get me wrong, it is an important factor, but for the most part, it's not the thing that they first reference. And I've placed people that are, that have had, 3 or 4 times offers, 3 or 4 financial offers, 3 or 4 times to the same size, and they've taken the role because actually it's the culture, the company, the people, the work, whatever it might be. And I think when you're hiring, understanding what makes you tick is really important, because even if you do try to go into bat on these other things that you've seen work elsewhere, even if you do manage to hire that person and it's not really you're hiring them and they're coming into something that isn't that. So you're actually, even if you've hired them, you're probably not going to retain them because it's not you. And you've missed out on that person that would have been the perfect person, really buys into you, what you're doing, and you've missed that opportunity. So I think knowing what makes you tick is really important.
Yeah. And interesting, I had a conversation with an ex-colleague of mine as when I was setting up a previous company, and she's done very well. She's very good at branding and so on, and the mission statement and all of that. And so Romany Thomas, if she ever hears this, thanks, Romany. And she turned around and she goes, Amir, what I would start is, what is it you don't want to be? And I thought that's a really interesting question, right? Because normally you go, what is it I want to be? Who are we? What do we want to do? Exactly. What don't we want to be? Let's kind of isolate that and look at that and make sure we're steering away from those kind of decisions. I thought it was a really fascinating way of looking at it. All right, that's why 2 pence worth there for you. So that kind of leads me on to a question, because this is trying to educate and inform. What's a common mistake people make with their first commercial hires, in your opinion?
So one of the things I think actually, so what you mentioned about what do you not want to be, first of all, I think that's really important. So when I've been interviewing, we talk about it. There's a lot of toxicity in certain recruitment companies. It's very important I know that's not what we want, and take away all the sort of pressure, and actually kind of working that out. And I've worked with a lot of companies where they may be, between perhaps 5 and 15 people into their hiring, and then they say, oh, we want to hire more women. And it's like, well, that's great, but there's like 9 men here. So when women see that, they can think, why is there all women? So you've got to work really hard to overcome that. So actually having that vision before you have to repair the damage, that's a really good thing. So it is, I think, understanding who, your vision, your mission, and really, really understanding, not just from a strapline perspective, but what is it you want to achieve. That's really important, because it's much easier. It's much harder to fix things that are cemented in place than it is to evolve things as you're moving along. So there's that aspect. But I think in terms of the first commercial hires, I think probably the biggest thing to take on board is perfection is the enemy of progress. If you want to hire that, So for some roles, you need, if it's like a co-founder or something like that, yeah, of course you need to get the fit right. You need to be able to get on with them and things like that. But if you're looking to build your technical team or something like that, and you're waiting for the perfect person who's done this thing, done that thing, done everything, probably the time it takes you to hire that person is probably more damaging than the benefit you get from having the person that, has got everything, but perhaps, hasn't done that particular, hasn't used Xilinx or whatever, but has used other FPGAs. It's like, you can deal with that. You can deal with that piece. You love everything else about this person. They live next door, for God's sake. Like, let overcome. And actually, by waiting for that perfect person, and then what you do, not only have you missed out on the timing of that person, you then start to get this perfect person in your head as the kind of minimum level. And so everyone else that comes to your door that could do the job, you need them to step over the bar of the person who is absolutely perfect, and you'll never see anyone that good again. And you're kind of, you're asking everyone else to be better than that. And then it just creates more and more delay. Your project goes away. And when you go back and speak to your investors in the next round, if you get that far, you're going to have an awkward conversation, because they're going to be wondering why you took 6 months to even interview another person, let alone hire them. And your run rate, your burn rates and all that is really going to hurt you. So I think, perfection's the enemy of progress.
And interestingly, in the workforce development stuff that I do with startups, one of the things I look at, which is, I'm going to ask you a question about this in a second, is that upskilling aspect. Factor in, okay, so the person doesn't have this skill set, right? How long will it take them to get that skill set? What's the cost involved? Can we spare the time? Because all of a sudden you start thinking in those ways, and you've got a solution to a problem, rather than trying to find somebody, especially in such a novel frontier tech such as quantum, or that person doesn't necessarily exist right now, but we have to create that person. So let's look at this, and let's look at the courses, whatever it may be, and that's a very important question. So which kind of led me on to the question I was going to ask you: are companies relying too heavily on universities instead of upskilling, in your opinion?
Yes, I think you need a mix of both, really. And one of the things I've been obsessed by in quantum, I don't think it's too strong a word, I've been obsessed by in quantum, is integration. And this is, it could be hardware to software, nation to nation, government, academia to industry, physics and chemistry, and whatever else. Is all of these disparate pieces. So we've basically got an ecosystem where you've got, a lot of people have, they have narrow and deep experience, rather than broad and shallow experience. And so there's a lot of people that are really brilliant at what they're doing, but they don't know what's happening in the lab next to them, let alone elsewhere. And I think how you integrate these pieces is the biggest thing that, in my mind, that quantum needs. So I think you need a hybrid approach to hiring, where universities are essential at the moment, but research groups are although they're still growing, they're a smaller percentage of the company, because the rest of the company is growing more quickly. So I think there's going to be that reliance upon academia for the research type roles. But one of the things, if you're building, so you build an ion trap setup, for example, which is great. So, but not everyone's on the measurements. So why not get a really good laser engineer who's got really good commercial savvy? And they say, well, if you put a vent there, move that there, and tune that this way, they know all the things that the measurement specialists don't know, because they've got a broad picture. And you bring those skills together, and you're stronger for it. And I think I see this when you look at the sort of global picture. So you may have someone that's been to the best school, the best universities, had all the equipment, and they're amazing. They've got this incredible sort of scientific acumen, and they've been trained. The standards are brilliant. And I will do a lot of stuff with the global south. So I see, particularly with I've spent a lot of time working with the quantum community in Africa. And I think with this, you see this sort of this hunger, this drive, this energy, this problem solving. Some of these people, they're writing quantum algorithms on a phone where the electricity generator may or may not work that day. And actually, if you've got those two different people and plug them together, guess what? They're going to teach each other some incredible things that they didn't even know existed. And I think this integration piece is important. So when you build that into your company, so if you hire someone who does the thing you want, but actually they need to learn other things, and you think, that's a bit of a cost to the business, I've got to take time and money to train them on that. That training and time isn't as much of a cost as a business as losing that person when you're in the middle of a really important product run. But if you've trained that person in something they want to learn, they're developing new skills, they're developing their role, their interest, exciting. Guess what? You retain that person. So the benefit of training them is much better, and they get the company culture and everything like that. They're a key component, and they've really bought into what you do. That pays you off multitudes more than the time and effort and money you spend.
Isn't that just so true? And I've seen it so many times. It's the case. The buy-in that you get from somebody that you've invested in, and they know they've invested in you as an employee, is so great and works every time. And that stops the people from jumping ship because, this company's looked after me. And then when you get new employees doing the factory walk around, or the sometimes depending on the position, especially in startups, in my experience, I always get people to talk to the team.
Yeah.
And the team members saying, oh, yeah, well, they trained me on ABC and it was a 6-month course. And now I've got that. And now I'm going to go into this. All of a sudden you're thinking, hold on, this is a place that really looks after their employees. And the buy-in, especially for startups, that's your foundation, your generals, and they're just going to help you grow that company.
Exactly. I think as well, actually, with that attraction piece as well, because when you're interviewing it, I think one of the things underestimated is, people ask questions and they ask kind of the stock in trade, kind of questions. And actually, if you turn that into asking about people's experiences, you get a much better answer. And a lot of the time when you talk about career growth and things, how have you experienced it? And if someone's saying, oh, well, I came in, I didn't have this skill, and actually they taught me this and I've learned that. And since then I've learned this. And it's not always the technical skills, it's the management skills that only future-proof that worker. So if someone comes in and they're working on quite a niche, so say they're working on UHVs or something like that, that's great. But then if tomorrow a system that did UHVs better than what they're currently working on was in place, that became redundant. But you've taught them on, FPGAs, or you've taught them management, customer interaction, whatever it might be. Guess what? They're still useful.
Yeah,
their skills transfers instantly. Those things, it's so important on so many levels to do that. And the other thing as well is when that company comes in and says, oh, that's the perfect person, I'm going to pay you twice as much, you're in with a fighting chance of that person saying, no, I don't want double the money, I really like what's happening here. They trusted me, I trust them. And I do actually still see that where I can come in with twice as much money, but someone's in the right place and you think, fair play, I'm not going to try and push too hard on this one. You are in the right place, and that's amazing.
Yeah. When I recruit for recruiters, one of the things I always used to do is, also you have your interviews and all of the test work, is get them in a room with one of my recruiters. No prep, no nothing. I don't want to know, and I don't necessarily. I get a bit of a debrief from the recruitment consultant as long as they're a decent, they're not on the exit ramp from your company. And so ask them what you want to ask them. Warts and all, because it's a big decision. You're going to be committing a lot of time mentally and physically and emotionally to this job. I want you to be eyes wide open, and they have really good conversations, and it works. And if they don't like that, then maybe it's not right fit. But for me, it works. It's worked so well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. As a business owner, I think there's some things there's some conversations that it's better for your business if you're not party to them. As counterintuitive as that sounds,
I know.
It may, sometimes if there's something that's a real
problem, why I'm always running away from my finance guy.
But so sometimes something may come up and it's like, oh, this is critical, you need to know about this. But actually, sometimes for people to be able to sort of bounce ideas off and you not be there and then be comfortable with it is important. But yeah, I think that there's that transparency is really important, particularly with startups. If you're building something and there's a crack that appears in the early stage, you embed that in, that crack's going to grow and grow and grow. And the bigger the business comes, the more weight gets put on that crack, the more likely it is to be catastrophic, rather than, at the time it might be inconvenient to go and deal with it. But in the long run, that a small amount of inconvenience is a massive thing. And it relates to one of the first things I learned in quantum is that the calls that make you squirm make you earn. And it's a little bit like that. If it's awkward, it's probably very valuable.
Yeah. Okay, slight pivot. I mean, it's all about quantum careers, and I really appreciate this. This is the eternal question now, isn't it? Can you build a serious quantum career without a PhD? Over to you, John Barnes.
I have.
True, and me.
Yeah, of course you can. The thing is, so I think with one of the things I'm often, I dread to think how many times I've been asked, how do I work in quantum? How do I get a career in quantum? And the first thing is always, work out what it is you want to do, what's important to you, what your motivation is. Because if you know where you want to get to, you can then work out what the steps are to get there. So if you want to be, if you want to be making superconducting qubits, you're probably going to need a PhD or somehow get the relevant experience, which is probably going to be quite difficult without it. You can maybe go in with a master or something, but you're going to need that research experience. However, if you're the person that's creating partnerships with that company, you probably don't need the PhD. And sometimes it's counterproductive to have that. Of course you can get into quantum without a PhD. I mean, to give you an idea, I've been in quantum since 2014. I didn't go to university, let alone not having a PhD. So I'd also say as well, when it comes to imposter syndrome, I've been in quantum without going to university since 2014. So that probably means that the bar's set low for most people to come and join. And if you want to get involved in quantum, get involved in quantum.
Yeah.
It's quite a welcoming place when you start reaching out to people. If you bring good vibes into it and you think, what can I do for quantum as your approach, you'll be welcomed by most people.
Well, I'm going to say something here, which I don't know if I've ever told you previously, but we first met in quantum tech in Twickenham a year and a half or so ago, and you were civil, very nice to me, etc. And then I kind of went away and started doing my own little things. And it comes back to, what are you giving to quantum? And so I've trying to educate people and so on and so forth. Then we met up again, and I think you kind of touched upon the fact that, you know what, you're not here to pillage, you're here to grow the industry and help people along. And I think since then we've kind of communicated a lot more, we work together and so on.
Yeah, well, over the years I've seen. So there's probably about 5 years where I was the only person in the world who was a quantum recruiter, quantum headhunter, and then over the last, since maybe a year or two before the pandemic, I've seen lots and lots of recruiters come in. They do the same old recruiter tricks. Obviously, back then there wasn't sort of AI slop that you could post around, or there wasn't the same fake conversations and stuff. But I've seen the same things rolled out again and again and again. And you have it's the same model. It's
is it the end? So what do you think?
Yeah,
tell me in the comments.
Yeah, of course. and it's I get people have got to learn, but and there's ways to do it, but it's the whole thing of where 6 months before they were doing something totally different. Sometimes not in recruitment. Sometimes they're recruiting into all different fields, and within 2 or 3 months, if that, they're an expert quantum recruiter. And then you see the LinkedIn profile. Then you see the LinkedIn profiles change, where 3 months ago they were doing something, and then that stretch. So it's suddenly 2 years ago, where they've obviously just stretched their experience and things like that. Yeah. You see the same model over and over again, and we've both been around recruitment long enough. We know that if you're working for a company, you're trying to crack a new market. If you jump into that and 6 months later you've not earned any money, you're getting your chain pulled.
For sure.
And I see it time and time again. And it's this whole thing, and being in the space, you can see through it so easily, but not everyone can, because they don't know what the ecosystem looks like, and they kind of sort of trust people. This is why I spent years trying to tell people all the bad things recruiters do, because I knew it was coming. But then you see them, and they're in the game for maybe 6 months, maybe 2 years, maybe something like that. And then they'll pivot off, and the next thing they'll be a Bitcoin expert, or whatever it might be. It's always
pivoted into robotics or something else, and so on and so forth.
And I think the thing with quantum is you've got to really learn. You've got to be authentic. You've got to, and recruiters often aren't humble enough to be able to say, "Oh, I don't know what that means. Can you explain that?" And I realized quite quickly that, so a lot of the time I was having conversations and I was sort of just writing everything down, and gradually with osmosis it would form a picture. And then after a while, you were confident enough to say, okay, I don't understand that. Can you explain that? Can you explain this? And that really just sort of turbocharged my learning and development. And I think, but I've seen that same thing over and over again, where people they're experts in the time that it's just not, you can't.
I tell you what,
every day I still have that time.
Imposter syndrome, because there's always something that pops up and you're like, I haven't got a clue what that is. But what I do love is that it allows me to research and figure something else out, and I'm constantly upskilling myself, as it were. And I do use the ChatGPT. I'm going to roll you on this, because I know you're so anti it. But it does have some good perks. It does have some good perks.
Hold on, let me be fair. I'm not saying that there's no place for ChatGPT. It's just the visible stuff I see is
We've
nonsense.
had many conversations.
Yeah, I'm not saying there's not a place. It's more. It's like when you see. So looking at the kind of proclaimed expertise, and I see people and they go, oh, the top 10 or 20 quantum computing companies in 2026, and it's like Cambridge Quantum comes up there. It's like, they haven't existed for 4 years.
That the other day.
It's ridiculous, It's like why are you and you look at the comments, and there's people who've got nothing to do with quantum who go, no, this is great, thanks for the information. And you've misinformed people who are taking you on face value. Anyone who's in quantum is kind of pulling it apart and saying they don't make quantum computers, they're sensing or whatever it might be. And I think it is, and actually it feeds into the hype and everything like that. It's disinformation, and actually this is why I'm actually so strongly against it. It's not the people. We need more people coming into quantum. We need more people to do all different functions, but we need them to do it in terms of actually to come in and learn and listen and develop and understand and impart what they can bring into the ecosystem, rather than try to give out expertise they don't have. There's a reason that I don't give talks on tuning a laser or writing algorithms, because I'm not that person. That's not me. I do workforce. This is my piece of the puzzle, and that I stick to what I know. And I think when it comes to that learning curve, one of the best things I find is every now and again something comes up and I don't know what it is. And I go, oh, what's that? Or is that related to such and such? And this is the thing I really like, because someone really wants to tell me all about this thing that happens that they've done, and it's like then I'm learning. I remember when I first started learning about qubits, and I actually thought that a qubit was a qubit. And then for about 10 years, so I was learning about qubits and qubits, and then for about 10 years, you never heard anything about them. And then all of a sudden, they kind of, with time crystals and stuff, they kind of came back around that time, they came back into focus a bit. But for a while, I didn't realize that it was just two states. So I thought it was kind of every state, and little things like that. And I had a conversation recently where it kind of threw me back to probably 10 or 12, about 10 years, when I was learning about all the weird and wonderful potential applications. So rather than the commercial stuff that we're embedded in now. And it was with regards to the quantum biology, and basically shining lights at molecule size stuff and see what happens. And it took me back to kind of all the weak magnetic fields and bird's eyes and navigation or biological navigation and things like that. And I was in my element. After the call, I was tired where my brain had been working. It was so fun, and I was just so enthusiastic afterwards. It kind of lit a little fire in me, because it was something I hadn't turned my brain to for a long time, and it was something I was able to learn from. And I think in quantum, that's the thing. If you're coming into it new and fresh, rather than try and pretend you know everything, learn everything, because it's exciting. That's the best thit. I'd love to go back to do that again.
Yeah, but it reminds me of, there's a book which is now a Netflix series, but it shows the 3-body problem and the dark forest, and it's I won't even begin to try to pronounce his name, but it's a Chinese author. And I read that, and every time I had to stop, because it was about quantum physics and space and all sorts of things, and literally read a chapter and my head would be like, I really don't know what that is. And you have to kind of sit there, think about what he's said, figure out how you can fire your synapses together to understand it and go forward. But it's such a challenge, and it's so fantastic. But there we go. Right, we're coming up to the hour mark. I'm sure we could go for another hour. Yeah. Okay, so quick fire. What's the worst job title you've ever seen?
Recruiter.
Thank you. Right, okay, so what are we? Talent alchemist? I hate that one.
Tottenham Hotspur footballer.
Your team. Oh, hold on. Arsenal are playing Man U this weekend, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, but actually, do you know, coming back to the we're in a global ecosystem. Not everyone realizes football is actually football. So we can before we bore people about about football. But I think actually the worst job title is quantum engineer.
Yeah.
Because it could be
that's just so open,
anything.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it could be anything. There's no value to it.
Yeah.
There's no value to it at all. I get why you might have that on the org chart, but in terms of a job description, there's no value to it at all.
It's
It
a place filler.
doesn't suit. Yeah, so I'd say
you
that's
might as well
probably
just put candidate A here and candidate
exactly.
B.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
What's the most overused buzzword?
Hype, but it is true. I don't know if it's a buzzword necessarily. Yeah, I think that I think, or I think as well with a lot of buzzwords, they're kind of in the time and the place. Maybe one that I like and I use quite a lot myself actually. So perhaps the one I use the most is ecosystem.
And no, so yeah, 100%. I found myself using that word so much to the point every time I said it, I'd cringe in myself.
Yeah,
but it is so apt, though.
It's true, yeah. And the only thing I think the limitation with that is probably I use it. I run the risk of using it where I know what I mean, but maybe I'm not. I kind of because in my head it's fine. It's an ecosystem. I'm talking about this specific ecosystem, and everyone else must know that. And I've kind of not. I think that's probably one as well. Yeah,
I find. Yeah, I literally got to a point where I was saying it in every call to the point where I didn't want to say it anymore. I'm like, no, let's think. It's weird. I kind of find it quite opening, but claustrophobic at the same time.
Yeah, I think
it's a bit of a weird one.
Actually, do you know what? Actually, it could even be that quantum is the buzzword because it's kind of a catch-all for people. Like, oh, there's something I can't explain. That's quantum. You know, there's
yeah.
The other thing as well when one of the other things as well when you have people that are coming into the ecosystem. And you can always, one of the things, for anyone that's been around quantum, if you've got someone that's coming in and trying to be an expert on day one, you can always spot it because they say every paragraph has got quantum about 10 times in it. And you know that because you've said quantum so many times, it undermines everything else that you're kind of saying. So, we've all been there, I'm pretty sure. That
there's a line in Ant-Man and one of the Ant-Man film, and I think it's the Quantumania or whatever it is. And he just turns around and goes, "Do you guys just put quantum in front of everything?" I just thought that was quite funny. The funniest one I saw: Shaw deodorant called quantum. I'm like, what the hell is that? I don't even know what that means.
Or quantum dishwasher tablets.
Dishwasher tablets.
It was either quantum dishwasher tablets or the Feynman lectures. That was
so your plates are either clean or they're not, or they're both, but you'll never know until you open the door.
But so when I first got into quantum, there was kind of quantum dishwasher tablets or the Feynman lectures, and that was about the only publicly available thing. So
right, okay, I think we're going to be drawing it to a close. Actually, one thing that somebody asked me, which I'm going to ask you, because obviously we collaborate. I don't know, people know we collaborate on roles and so on, although we're allegedly competitors. Why do you think that works in quantum?
So outside of quantum, I've worked with associate agents where I've known them before, built up a rapport. There's this trust there, so I think that's a background I've known to work well with the right person. And I think that's the important thing with the right person. I think as a general rule, most of the people in quantum I wouldn't have worked with. So it took me about a year to assess whether that was right. Sort of capacity limits and things like that. So I think there's that angle. I think within quantum as well, so when it comes to scaling a recruitment company, so people talk about there not being many, like how hard it is to hire in quantum. And I think, first of all, in a couple of years' time, people are going to be looking back at this as the golden age where they could get candidates easily. I think for some people, for some businesses, but I think in quantum recruitment, there's far fewer quantum recruiters than there are pretty much anything else in quantum. So I think from that side of things, it lends itself to that. I also think as well that so when you look at people who recruit into quantum, most of the people recruiting into quantum have only recruited into quantum, and they don't know recruitment outside, or they've not been in quantum very long, so they know the recruitment and not the quantum, or the quantum and not recruitment. It's the same sort of if you span that out. There's not a lot of quantum knowledge in commerce and not a lot of commercial knowledge in quantum. And I think when it comes to recruitment, there's not much where you've kind of got both of the people that have a really solid background in both parts of that. And I think that lends itself to these things happening. So when we work together, obviously we're at slightly different stages and come at it from a slightly different timeline. But equally, when we talk about things, we both come from a similar background where we know this works this way, this works that way, and the rest of it. And I think it's this humility, because I've always felt that, kind of people, ignorance is an opportunity to learn. And I think from that side of things, as long as you're coming at things from the same angle, the information, you can share information, you can develop that.
Yeah.
But there are
Yeah.
certain things, certain attributes that are much harder to develop. And I think that piece is much more important than, knowing exactly what, what a MOT does, or, how a UHV works, or what a, particular algorithm is, or anything like that.
Yeah.
But
when he asked me that question, I answered. I said, "Well, I think we're both coming at it from. I mean, you've got your more longevity in this field, but we're both coming at it from a shared vision of where we see it going and what we want to do to help it get there. And with that, there's also because I have that shared vision with you, and I know that you have it. The trust is there. I trust that you're going to put all in. You're going to do a good job. You're going to be. You've got your ethics, your moral compass is very similar to mine, and so on. It's literally a case of, right, okay, let's run with it. I don't need to monitor. I know you're going to do a good job, and also I respect you and I respect your brand. I respect what you've done so far in quantum, and I respect we've talked off the record about what you want to do going forwards. And that means a lot. And that's why I think, I'm really happy to work with this person because, let's all push forwards together. There's a lot to do. There's a hell of a lot to do. There's a lot of challenges. And if you've got some sort of wingman like that I think is fantastic. All right.
And
last question.
Sorry, just one thing on that as well. I think actually, you mentioned about QTech in Twickenham and then Rotterdam, and it was kind of, watching for over a year, and I think we was on a couple of different sort of chats together and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it was kind of watching from a distance and seeing how people act when they think no one's watching, and also you kind of get feedback from the market, but also you get all the feedback from the market and things like that. You can sort of feel you get a lot of things coming back, and so it's not a rushed process. And actually, I think generally speaking, with sort of collaboration, I think it probably doesn't work in quantum for the most part. So I think this is probably an exception. There are a couple of people who I really respect with the ecosystem we're in. For the most part, I see a lot of typical recruiters, and I see the activities as being typical recruitment activities. And I think actually in quantum we can do better than that. We don't need to just import all of the bad habits from recruitment. We can do a lot better than that. And I think that's something that I do feel strongly about. So I think for the most part, it's probably unusual that we've been able that we've done this rather than the norm, I would say.
Yeah. But then I suppose it's still a small field. But that's also one of the reasons why I wanted you to come onto this podcast, because my friends were saying, who are you speaking to tonight? I says, oh yeah, it's a recruitment consultant. He's in quantum. He's like, hold on, isn't that what you do? I'm like, well, yeah, that is what I do. Isn't that your competitor? I said, well, it is, but he isn't at the same time. So actually, I don't see us as competitors. I see us as colleagues, really. You've got your brand, I've got mine. Right. Final question, because we're at 1 hour 10, which is pretty impressive. Where do you see quantum hiring heading in 2026?
So I think in terms of rehiring in quantum, so it's more. I think the journey of travel is going to be quite similar to, or further expansion of what's been happening. The last sort of 6 months or so, it's been all about the commercial roles, and which is good. Companies are learning that earning money is quite helpful to having a good business. I like this. This is a good, healthy place to be. So I think there's more of that. I do also think as well that there's a big shift coming in the market that I can see, and it's not. I don't know how visible it is to most people, but there's kind of the non-quantum quantum companies, if you like. That's
Yes.
I don't think this is going to be hugely. I think you might see the thin end of the wedge in 2026, but it's going to be more what unfolds after that, because we've worked in an industry where, for the most part, it's quantum people building a quantum thing and then trying to sell a quantum thing to non-quantum people, and that's a necessary pathway. Looking at what's happening ahead, and there's some really interesting things where people are looking at big problems to solve and then kind of retrofitting. I'm having to be very careful what I say here, because I'm tied to a lot of NDAs and stuff like that, so I can't talk about specifics.
Exactly. I was just going to go whoop.
But I wouldn't talk about specifics anyway, because I don't want people to know what I'm doing. Of course not. I don't come from a publish or perish mindset. I don't want anyone to know what I'm doing, what I'm thinking. I also want to build it so that even if people did know, they couldn't copy me. That's my model. But the thing is people are looking at really big challenges that if you can solve them, there's a lot of value to that. and then you retrofit, what do I need for that? And quantum is just one of a stack of technology. So they're not quantum companies, but they are quantum their company does a lot of quantums, and
they
it will
are
be
companies
to the same
who are quantifying what they can do with quantum.
Yeah,
How's
and
that
I
for a
think
mouthful?
the it's too buzzwordy, but I think actually you kind of with this, they deliberately don't want to call themselves quantum companies, and they it's more about a solution to a thing.
Exactly,
Quantum is
and
one
they
piece of the
don't need
stack,
to.
but the quantum piece is likely to be as big as anything that's happening in quantum at the moment as well. So the scale is going to be significant, and actually, I think this is going to be something that is really going to be an interesting development to the market. Alongside that, obviously the stuff that everyone can see, the mergers and acquisitions that are going to be happening. We all know that's starting. It's going to increase. All the consolidation stuff. That's not a surprise to anyone. That's been around the space. I think with that though, I think there's an interesting thing as people merge, because you kind of have almost like the bigger and smaller partners, and they're never equal. So how that harmonizes, and generally speaking, you get a situation where the smaller partner, there's a lot of things that don't go down particularly well there, and therefore you get a lot of people moving, or the culture's not right, and things like that. That's also something that's coming into place. But the quantum market is uncertain by definition. If it wasn't, I'd find that weird. But I think there's a lot of opportunity created by that. And I think as well, when it comes to things like redundancies, there's naturally a lot of people get worried by redundancies. But I've been in recruitment for over 20 years now, as you have. People with good skills, when there's redundancies, they almost always are better off after that than before. But they need to overcome that uncertainty. So I think there's a lot of things as it grown up that as quantum grows up, there's a lot of things that people in quantum haven't seen before that'll come as a big shock to them. But it's fine. It's fine. You'll be okay.
That's exciting. It's exciting. Excellent. Right. For what was supposed to be 40 minutes, we're now at 1 hour 15. So, but hey, fantastic. John, thanks so much for joining me. And for those listening, Entangled Positions, it's not just a recruitment firm anymore. It's part of the infrastructure of the quantum ecosystem. You can find John at Entangled Positions on LinkedIn. You can find me at QAI Talent. Hope you all enjoyed this episode. And John, I will hopefully be seeing you a week today, actually.
Yeah. For Quips, if people don't know, Quips, Joe Spencer created Quantum in Pubs in the Strand in London. If you're nearby, come along and say hi.
Fantastic. John, until the next time, take it easy.
Yeah, thanks, Amir. Thanks, everyone.
That's it for this episode of Beyond the Bit Quantum Pathways. If you found it useful, follow and subscribe wherever you listen, and share it with someone working in quantum or emerging tech. And if your organisation is hiring in quantum, you can find us at QAI Talent. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.